Turning to our top story on the China-Russian summit between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, we have with us Professor Li Mingjiang. He's the Associate Professor and Provost Chair in International Relations at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University. Professor, let's get right down to it. Now, earlier, our correspondent spoke to us. He said no big deals on either military support or even a furthering of economic support from China to Russia at a point when Russia deeply needs more economic support. So apart from the hyperbolic gush about brotherly ties, dear friends, and a new era of special relations, what did we see coming out of this summit?
Well, there are a couple of takeaways. Particularly from the Chinese perspective, it was perhaps a quite successful visit. Chinese leader Xi Jinping chose Russia as the country to visit, first country to visit after he started his third term. And also, the two leaders took the opportunity to reaffirm their commitment to a robust and strong strategic partnership. You've seen this in the interactions between Xi Jinping and Putin, in the articles that the two leaders publish in one another's official media outlets, and also in the joint statement. So it's quite strong pledge for a robust and long-term strategic relationship between the two countries. Yeah, it's also important to look at the long list of items of cooperation and collaboration.
So, this long list, could you highlight, areas. Say, the top three that for you are the most significant?
Well, it's first of all, it's about global geopolitics. There's a lot of statements, a lot of things that the two leaders in two countries have expressed in terms of how China and Russia can collaborate, right, to push for changes or dynamics in international politics.
We can agree to push forward, but you don't give me weapons. You don't agree on a pipeline to go through Mongolia for me to sell oil to you or gas to you when I desperately need to do so. Where is the real strategic partnership?
It's about China and Russia working together to undermine or balance American hegemony. It's about supporting each other when it comes to some of the political issues like human rights, intervention in domestic affairs, and expanding the role of some of the institutions that China and Russia have larger say. For instance, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS, etc. Yeah, certainly on the Ukraine issue, I think Chinese leaders may feel quite good about the outcome. Putin at least gave a slightly more positive response to China's peace plan and China's possible role as a mediator. So that may have provided a bit of incentive for China to continue some of these attempts.
All right, speaking of positive responses to that peace plan, we've got one response that is decidedly negative. Let's take a look at it right now. It's from Taiwan's foreign minister, who tweeted on the ministry's website, and I quote that for you here. We can take a look at it on screen now. The PRC threatens war against Taiwan and others, but wants to propose a peace plan to Russia, who initiated that war against Ukraine. We ain't no idiots. Now, excusing that solecism there, of the many things that we can think he is, Ukraine's president is no idiot. And yet he has openly been very, very positive about speaking to China and thinking that there is something to be said for China's peace plan.
Yeah, we've seen sort of like ambivalent response from Ukraine towards China's peace plan. I guess for Ukraine, it does no harm. If any major power or another party wants to call for peace or work to help facilitate peace. And certainly by identifying China as a playing a role for peace, it would create a bit of pressure on China in terms of how China is going to handle, Russia. The fact that China is interested in positioning itself as a mediator, a peacemaker, and it will automatically generate some pressure for China to be more neutral.
So to be very simplistic here, essentially, if peace is to be reached, Ukraine has to give something, Russia has to give something, and as you just suggested, President Xi Jinping is likely the only person who can put any kind of pressure on Vladimir Putin. And by putting himself forward as a peacemaker, he suggests there is some pressure on him to put this pressure on Mr. Putin. But I believe you do not think Mr. Xi will ever do that. Not at this point, anyway.
For now, it's going to be very difficult, perhaps almost impossible for China to exercise any sort of influence on Putin or Russia.
Why impossible?
Well, if you look at the past year, China has tried to do everything possible to avoid any negative impact that its position, its statements on the Ukraine war may have on China-Russia strategic partnership. So if China would exert any influence on Russia, on any matter that against Russia's policy preference, you will see growth of frustration and perhaps unhappiness.
So if China is not going to risk angering Mr. Putin, what does it gain from putting itself forward as a peacemaker when no such peace is, even in the medium term, possible?
Yeah, for now, what China has been doing is making a call and using rhetoric to persuade the two parties to be more serious about a peaceful settlement. Right? There's no actual action. There's no substance in terms of
so there's no substance.
Role.
It can't fail anyway.
It cannot fail. That's right.
China will continue to talk about we want peace, and everyone wins.
Exactly. So nobody can blame China if there's no progress for peace talks, right? And even eventually fails, it won't be China's fault. It will be the participants themselves. So for China, it's a safe bet, right? You call for peace, you make some general proposal for political settlement, and you can gain some moral high ground. It's a positive development, and I think some people will say, no matter what, a war cannot, be forever. Ultimately you need a settlement, and conflict really has to be resolved through negotiations.
All right, but we look at the very first step of China's peace plan. Let's take a look at that. In fact, let's not even go to the 12 points of that peace plan. If we stay on the very first, all countries' sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity will be effectively guaranteed. Now, on that first item alone, many people, certainly Taiwan's foreign minister, would say, well, we're not seeing that. What kind of peace plan is this if you are going for a banquet, a state banquet, with a man who has clearly violated someone else's territorial integrity? China's aware of this, no?
Of course. I think the contradictions are there. I think people in China also understand. But the pro-Russia position that China has held ever since the outbreak of the war cannot be changed. There's a fundamental driving force behind China's policy and the posture. And the only thing that China can do is to become slightly more neutral and become slightly more active in terms of engaging Ukraine, which may happen in the short term. But for China, we've seen some of the comments from Chinese analysts. The issue of Ukraine war and the issue of Taiwan are quite different. So other people may see sort of
contradictions or
analogy, but for China, these are separate
Okay, a final question here. Since you bring up Taiwan, when this invasion started, a lot of chatter, certainly in Asia, because Taiwan is a very big issue here, was China, and this is one way of thinking about this, will look at what's happening in Ukraine and see the support that Ukraine is getting from countries, organizations that before the war, many people thought would not unite in favor of defending Ukraine. And yet they have done so in the past year. China will draw lessons from this and therefore be more circumspect in how it approaches Taiwan. In this year and a bit, has that actually happened?
Well, I don't think the Ukraine war is going to change China's overall plan on the Taiwan issue. Its ultimate goal of unification perhaps will stay. But I think a lot of people will believe that the war itself and the cost that Russia has experienced may have made Chinese decision makers to be more cautious when it comes to the Taiwan issue. They will probably have to think about how to make better preparation economically, politically,
so
militarily,
that any attack has
whatever.
to be fast and necessarily successful.
I think they have to bear in mind the sanctions and economic consequences if there's like military solution on the Taiwan issue.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very
Professor
much.
Li Mingjiang from RSI's in NTU. Thank you.
Thank you.